Today, we're talking about what happens to our body when we go through the fertility, conception, pregnancy, postpartum stages. And why I like talking about this is because mainly this audience and our listeners are women. And even though we're entrepreneurs and we're ambitious, a lot of us also want to enter motherhood. And I know I'm recording this at 23 weeks pregnant, and I decided to bring on board certified OB-GYN Dr. Caledonia Buckheit to give us the real on all this stuff. So we are talking about if you're planning for kids, how does age affect that journey? If you're looking at optimizing for fertility, what does that look like from her perspective? And then we get into what is the physical experience really of being pregnant? How often should you be working out, and what should that look like for you? What's going on with your hormones? What does she see, the difference between being pregnant in your 20s versus your 30s versus 40s? And postpartum, I know especially as a pregnant woman, can sometimes feel like a little bit of a black box because there's so much information and so many resources when you're in the pregnancy journey, but what happens after? And so she also talks about the hormone reality of what happens then and some advice for women, especially like our listeners and myself, who are ambitious and who do plan on returning back to work and finding some way to balance it all. So I wish I had this episode before I got pregnant. There is so much valuable stuff in here, and I got so much out of this conversation. So Dr. Callie, thank you for being here. Listeners, you are in for a treat. Let's get into it. Welcome to Confessions of a Spiritual Entrepreneur. I am your host, Samantha Fackler, business mentor and brand strategist. This show is about what it takes to build something in public, a business, a body of work, a brand, or a creative project so that you reach the right people. After 14 years in brand and marketing, I've seen so much confusing advice out there that tells you either need systems and rigid frameworks or intuition and manifestation vibes. And from my experience working with over 100 companies and even more clients, I find that growth is somewhere in the middle. So here we talk about the real choices of creating, showing up, and attracting the people that your work is meant for. Right now, I am very pregnant while running my company, so that journey will probably make its way into the show too. I'm glad you're here. Let's get into it. Today, we are joined by Dr. Caledonia Buckheit. She is an OB-GYN and such an angel to come to the show today and talk with us about all things about how women move through this transition from trying to conceive, pregnancy to postpartum. Callie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'd love to jump in because there's so much to cover today. And I think right off the bat, you have a private practice. You were saying earlier that you work with a lot of women that are like you. They're busy, they might own a business, but they also want to become mothers. And so I just want to talk a bit about that. Women that are thinking about one day, I do want to conceive, but I have so much going on right now.
Yeah, I think a helpful first step is to think about your overall timeline and goals. And so I think that planning for a pregnancy and all of that can look different depending on what your family goals are, right? So if somebody wants to have 5 or 6 kids, then they may need to be, starting that journey earlier. Or if it's someone who's like, I might like to have a child and one, if it happens, would be fine, right? So those are like super different conversations. So I think thinking about your career and your family goals and what that trajectory would ideally look like for you at the end, right? Like if you think, okay, 15 years from now, this is what I would like my career and family to look like, and then working backwards from there.
Yeah, I don't think that's talked about enough is like, how many kids do you want? And are you doing this on your own? Do you have a partner? Like, what does your overall life look like?
Right, because I think it's easy to assume like, oh yeah, like most people are going to want 2 to 3 kids, right? Like you make these assumptions, but for some people it might be like, I would love to be a mother if that happens for me, versus I will become a mother no matter what, even if that means that I'm being a single parent by choice. So I think having those goals and priorities like really clear for yourself is going to set yourself up for success, because then you're able to make plans and take action in order to support that future goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I know we were also talking about, egg freezing and age. So how do these different things play a role in that planning stage?
Yeah, I mean, I think for someone whose priorities are to be a parent, to be genetically related to their offspring, and to carry a pregnancy themselves, I think if those are your goals and you're in your 20s or 30s and maybe you don't have a partner or like a super clear timeline for when you're going to start trying to conceive, but those are super clear priorities of yours, that would be somebody who should seriously consider egg freezing because you're most likely to benefit from it. Ideally, for egg freezing, your best chance to have like successful in terms of the number of eggs that you get and then the ability of those to then one day be fertilized into embryos that survive and get implanted, ideally doing this by your mid 30s is ideal. So the younger you are, the easier it is generally to stimulate your ovaries to collect eggs for egg freezing. And so as you get into your late 30s and even 40 or beyond, it just is a lot harder to stimulate the ovaries. Your egg reserve is a lot lower, and then the egg quality is lower as we get older. And so just the success rate and the number of healthy eggs that you could potentially get from egg freezing is going to decline the older you get.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think there's also this big narrative right now about kind of taking care of your body, being intentional about what you eat, exercise, but as well as your partner for egg quality, for egg freezing, for conception. And I'm curious your thoughts on that because it's such a big narrative right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest way to think about it is anything that is overall healthy for your body is healthy for your ovaries and your eggs also. So, getting enough sleep, getting enough exercise, staying well hydrated, eating nutritious foods, maintaining overall a healthy lifestyle that limits toxic exposures like alcohol, drugs, tobacco, exposure to toxic chemicals, right? All of those things I think we could all agree are good for our overall health, and they are certainly the same is true for in terms of the health of your ovaries and your eggs. And it also goes for sperm health too. I actually today, it's funny, I had 2 different visits today where my patient had brought in their male partner and we talked about how to make sure that they were optimizing just simple lifestyle things to optimize their sperm health too.
Okay, let's dig into that a bit because there have been a lot of big articles about the partner's health. So now more men are taking their health seriously for, 6 months to a year before the couple starts trying. Is there any research around this?
There's definitely a large body of research around this, but simple things to think about, low-hanging fruit to talk about. I always just talk about healthy lifestyle in general, and I always ask about THC use, nicotine, and alcohol because we have very strong evidence, especially for THC and nicotine, around how those negatively impact sperm parameters. So really like talking about that right up front, that can impact your sperm parameters, your ability to be able to successfully conceive as a couple. Other like low-hanging fruit, if you will, would be thinking about heat exposure. And so we know that if men like sit with a laptop or gaming consoles, things like that right on their lap, that raises the temperature that the sperm are exposed to, and then that can limit their efficacy, their ability to swim and, fertilize an egg. So we talk about that kind of heat exposure. Sauna, cold plunge therapy is becoming like a lot more popular. And I think you can kind of extrapolate from what we know about these heat studies that if you're using heat therapy in a sauna or in like a hot tub or something like that quite frequently, and especially if you're not pairing it with cold plunge therapy, that could also damage. So kind of being cognizant about that. The other thing is thinking about supplements that men are taking around performance. And so some of these can either be directly or indirectly enhancing androgen exposure in these men. And this is almost like male birth control in a way, like you're kind of like telling the male brain like, oh, you already have testosterone around, like you don't have to send out those signals, so it can actually suppress sperm production.
Interesting. Yeah, my husband loves the sauna cold plunge and he had to take a break when we were trying to get pregnant.
Yeah, trying to conceive. Yeah, I know. Like people are asking me more about that, and it seems like cold plunge is probably fine for the sperm based on what I've been reading, but like the sauna part of it, I'm like, but what if you pair it with the cold plunge? I'm like, maybe it's okay, but kind of unopposed frequent heat therapy we know seems to be problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. And then something that has come up for me, I mean, I got pregnant last October, and so I'm now in my second trimester. The hormone roller coaster is very, very real. And I think especially the relaxin hormone, that was one of the first things that I noticed when I became pregnant. I felt really chilled out and like my joints and everything just all relaxed. And I remember one of my first yoga classes, I was like, wait, I'm like off balance and my
so
body's
flexible.
doing different things right now. And as my pregnancy has progressed, obviously more emotion. I mean, I watched the Super Bowl and I was crying at different advertisements. I was like, okay, here we go. And I'm just curious, kind of your guidance for women as they go through this and they experience all of these new hormones happening during pregnancy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be a little destabilizing, right? When you're sort of used to yourself and your body and how you normally react to things, and then all of a sudden that's sort of like thrown for a loop. I also think as more women are having their children and starting their families in like their 30s or even early 40s, we have a stronger sense of like who we are and who we expect ourselves to be in certain settings, I think, than you do when you're younger. And so I think it can feel like all the more jarring for this population of women who are becoming moms now. But I think it's important to remember like it won't last forever. This is a defined amount of time in your life. Just because you feel really emotionally unregulated at this time, that doesn't mean you're always going to feel that way. And giving yourself that grace and that time and space to sort of work through.
I'm glad you said that. It's true. Like if I were to go through this at 27, 28, I think I'd have more flexibility with it. But now I'm like, wow, this is so different than how I typically react to something like a Super Bowl advertisement.
Right. And I think in like the business and job world, I think when someone's in their 30s, they have like such a strong identity of who they are in the workplace and who they are for their colleagues. And I think it can feel more overwhelming to have these changes arise where you're like, what do you mean I'm tired at 2 p.m. and like can barely get my work done? Like, what do you mean like this interchange with this colleague is making me feel so upset and emotionally unregulated? You know, it can be, I think, even more intense than maybe when you're in your 20s and like just starting new jobs and there's so many changes around you that you kind of are more used to rolling with the punches at that stage of your life than when you're maybe more established in your career.
Yeah. And it brings up a bigger topic, I think, that I've been thinking about, which is, sometimes I wonder, wow, what would this be like if I did get pregnant when I was younger? Would it be easier? Would it be harder? Would I recover differently? And so when thinking about getting pregnant in age, how do you think about that from your point of view?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question. And I think, I don't know, the good and the bad of it is that it is physically a lot easier when you're younger. Like it just is. I remember one of the first experiences I had when I was a medical student on labor and delivery was I had an 18-year-old and a 37-year-old. They were both like admitted around the same time. I watched both of their labor courses, went to both of their deliveries, rounded on both of them postpartum. And I just remember like, this is like a core memory in my medical training of like, wow, biologically, like we should really do this at 18. Like, yeah. Like that went a lot better. I have witnessed that, as I've kind of continued through, and I've now, that was 12 years ago now that I saw that, and it has continued to be the case. By no means is it impossible to be a mom as you are older. It is very much becoming the norm. It is very much doable, and women do great, but just physically for your body, and even for things like how your oxytocin receptors and like how your labor course goes and how your tissues stretch and how they remodel during labor, delivery, postpartum. It's just, you really do notice those differences in women who are older versus younger.
Yeah. And, I'm 34, but I know lots of women who, they've taken the time to rise in their careers, maybe start their own business, take the leap into becoming an author or a podcast host or doing these things that they've really prioritized and felt called to before entering motherhood. And so for those that have taken that path that are maybe looking at becoming a mother in their late 30s or 40s, is there anything they can do during pregnancy to work with these things that might not be as snappy, so to speak?
I would say one of the things I talk about a lot and recommend to everyone, but especially to women who have like additional risk factors such as age or higher BMI, for example, is prioritizing exercise. So I think exercise in pregnancy is like an underutilized tool, and it's hard because of a number of factors. One, in the first trimester, a lot of people feel quite ill and quite tired. And so it's hard to, a lot of times, even if you were in a good routine with your exercise and you had things that you were really enjoying doing and doing regularly, you may kind of fall off of that in the first trimester because of all of those changes. And I really blame no one for that. Most people, though, once you get into the second trimester, start physically feeling a bit better. But I think there's a lot of mixed messaging around exercise in pregnancy. And I often encounter patients in the second trimester who are nervous to go back to what they'd been doing pre-pregnancy because they worry that it's not safe. The vast majority of exercise activities are safe in pregnancy. pregnancy, the vast majority, right? I'm talking yoga, Pilates, weightlifting, running, biking. I mean, you name it, swimming. Like, you can keep doing these activities that you were doing pre-pregnancy throughout your pregnancy, just with modifications for comfort and practicality. But I think that is a myth that needs to be busted widely, that there's like, all these limitations to exercise around pregnancy. My rule of thumb for patients is if you were doing it pre-pregnancy, you can do it during pregnancy. And if you want to do an activity, give it a try and listen to your body. I think that should be what is broadcasted around exercise in pregnancy, because there's great studies, even just with like step count studies and just moderate exercise. So like walking 5 days a week, for example, there's great studies that show women have a significantly lower risk of developing gestational diabetes and blood pressure issues related to pregnancy, both of which are much higher frequency in women who are older, but anyone who's pregnant has those risks. So it's an underutilized tool, and kind of really doing whatever you can to enjoy the exercise that you're doing and continue to do the exercise kind of throughout your pregnancy.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, in my first trimester, I definitely had days where I was like, I cannot exercise. But I found that when I did, one of two things would happen. One, I would actually have more energy. But two, if I exercised in a way that was exactly what I was doing before, I felt completely exhausted. And so for me, I had to kind of find like a more moderate form of what I was doing before. Do you find that that's common?
Yeah, I think that's super common. And I always counsel patients, like, you're not going to PR during pregnancy, right? Like, you have like a wildly expanded blood volume, your lung capacity is decreasing, your heart is working twice as hard. We're not trying to PR, but like, you can definitely continue. Say you used to run an 8-minute mile, like, you can probably keep running. It might become a 9-minute mile, then it becomes a 10-minute mile, and then at the end you're walking uphill. Like, great. But all of that is good. And you just kind of adjust that benchmark as you go to how you're feeling.
Absolutely. I had a friend who shared her mileage during her pregnancy. She was a marathon runner. So, I mean, she was used to running 120 plus miles a week. Obviously, her mileage decreased over her pregnancy, but I mean, she was still running half marathons at the end in her third trimester.
I used to be a much more avid runner than I am now, but I use the example of running where I'm like, okay, if you were running half marathons pre-pregnancy, like, you can probably continue to train for a half marathon and maybe do a 10K, right? But if you are like, had never run before, this is not the time that you like decide I'm going to run a 5K, right? Like, maybe we walk, So it's just, you kind of adjust based on where your baseline is. But that actually is a perfect example, right? She was running marathons pre, and then she could still run a half marathon pregnancy. That makes a lot of sense.
Got it. Yeah, that does. And, besides exercise, is there anything else that these women can do to kind of optimize their pregnancy?
I mean, I think nutrition wise, like, really focusing on putting good things into your body and trying to eat whole foods, stay well hydrated, focusing on lean proteins and making sure you don't become iron deficient or deficient in other nutrients. And then pelvic floor physical therapy is something that I think honestly everyone could benefit from in pregnancy and postpartum, but especially older moms, because of the tissue changes. You're just like a little bit more of a setup to have issues with how your pelvic floor responds and recovers. So I think pelvic floor physical therapy, low threshold to initiate that.
So exercise, food, pelvic floor therapy. And, now, especially as someone in their second trimester, I'm looking at what's on the horizon with labor and delivery, which is like such a short time span in comparison to the overall pregnancy. And yet it's this crescendo moment. Yeah. What do you view in terms of that mini journey that happens? That's also a major journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways that I could answer that question, but thinking about labor and delivery can be really overwhelming, I think, because there's so many different ways that it could go. And I think a good mindset to end up with a happy experience is to be open to all potential outcomes of your labor and your delivery, and to control the things you're able to control about a birth plan. So where you're going to be, who's going to be with you, what you're going to have available to you, who your care team is. These are all things that you can control to create a pod of good energy and needs met as you go into labor and delivery, because honestly, who knows what's going to happen, right? Is it going to be spontaneous labor? Is it going to be an induction? Is your baby going to become breech at the last minute? Like, who knows, honestly. So I think you control what you can control.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's more discourse now on doulas. I know there are certain states that are starting to cover doula services, but I'm curious, like, what is your unfiltered view on doulas?
so. Doulas are an evidence-based support for labor and delivery, which has been shown to improve outcomes, including like pain, reducing cesarean delivery rate. So I think in general, I'm very supportive of doulas, but I think an important piece to have a successful experience with a doula is that you and the doula have a good understanding of what your goals are, and that the doula understands how to interface with whoever your care team is. Because I think where kind of laboring with a doula can become challenging is when instead of prioritizing the patient's needs, has kind of their own agenda, or instead of kind of working with the care team and the patient, they are pushing one way or another, but that's really not their role. Their role is to be a support and a continuous labor support for the patient.
Before this, I was imagining, I was like, okay, so board certified OB-GYN, a midwife, and a doula walk into a bar.
We're all best friends,
Okay.
in my opinion. But I was trained by midwives. Like at Duke, we have midwives run the labor floor. And so before you ever really work with the OB-GYNs as an OB intern at Duke, you mainly work with a midwife, and they teach you normal labor and delivery. And you do that with a midwife. And then once you like have mastered that and you know how to like check a cervix and like monitor a baby and like do all the normal things, then you protect the perineum, deliver a baby. Right. Once you know how to do that, then you start managing like induction of labor, blood sugar during pregnancy, magnesium for preeclampsia. Like then you learn all of that from the MDs. So I think from my training, I love midwife deliveries. I was born at home. Like my mom had 3 of her 4 kids at home. So like I'm very like crunchy as my background, and I love it when things can go that way. And then I sort of see my role as an OB-GYN as like, honestly, if everything's going perfect, like you don't even need me. Like I'm just there to hang out and like have a good time. Like the dad could catch the baby. Like who cares, right? If everything's going great. But my role is for when things are not normal, and for when you need intervention to keep things rolling appropriately, or when you need to make an intervention for mom safety or for baby safety, that type of thing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
My dream is like the doula and the midwife and the patient just do everything. And I'm just like hanging out. Yeah, just there just in case.
And I'm curious your view on home births, especially given that your mom had, 3 out of 4 at home. And
I think it all comes down to your comfort with risk. So my comfort with risk is that like I don't want to die in childbirth, and like I don't want my baby to die, and I want to maximize the chances that everyone's alive. That's my priorities. But for other people, they're like, I am comfortable with like a 5% chance of like just total catastrophe and a 95% chance that everything's fine. Like I'm good with that, right? Like for me, I'm like, no, I want to make that like a 99.7% chance that everything's fine. And so I'm gonna be in the hospital with the blood bank, right? But for other people, they're comfortable. They understand it's not like a guarantee that everything's going to go great at home, but they're like, you know what? Like I accept those risks. I recognize they exist, but for me and for my priorities, I'm comfortable with the fact that I'm like likely to be fine and my baby's likely to be fine. I'm good with that. Do you know what I mean? So I think it comes down, for me, when I think about it, I'm like, it comes down to how you think about risk.
yeah, I think that's a great perspective. I plan on having a hospital birth because I don't want risk. I'm not cool with risk. I'm like, I want to be surrounded by all the machines and all the things just in case.
Yeah. And then like, hopefully you need none of them and you just have like your tea lights, right? Like, I agree. I'm sort of like, I just want everything there just in case.
And then, of course, the big event happens, the baby arrives. Hopefully, everything is healthy and smooth, ideally. But then postpartum, it's interesting being a pregnant woman and viewing that, because I feel like it kind of feels like a black box. Like there's so much information about pregnancy and even fertility right now, but postpartum seems to kind of be a mystery. Like some people have baby blues, some people have postpartum depression or anxiety. Recovery looks so different for everyone. I don't know if you could share your thoughts there, especially for women who are mid to late 30s, early 40s.
Yeah, I mean, I would say everyone should expect a big emotional roller coaster. I think that is almost universal because hormone-wise, you have these very high levels of like estrogen, progesterone, you're supporting this pregnancy, you're growing this placenta, and then all of a sudden the placenta comes out, your prolactin rises, like you just have massive hormonal changes happening, and that inevitably leads to major mood and emotional symptoms. That's what's going to happen. I think recognizing that that is like the norm and to be expected, and you just ride the wave, and also like have people who are around you to support you. I think the people who have the hardest time is when there's limited support postpartum. Like either there's maybe a partner who has to immediately go back to work, maybe there's no family in town, maybe they just moved to the city and they don't have a bunch of friends close by. I think those are the hardest situations because it is this roller coaster and there is this huge shift, and if you don't have all those supports, it just makes it that much harder. But I think building your village and having that expectation that you're probably going to need to ask for help, and that's like totally normal and okay, and things are going to make you cry that you don't think should make you cry, and you're going to be sleep deprived. I think all of those things can be expected, and sort of trying to set up your resources in your home and in your setting to be ready for that as best you can.
Yeah. And I know a lot of women who go through this period, they're like, it's so strange because I'm holding kind of two big things at once. One is like this joy around the baby being there, this like love, but also feeling exhausted or feeling all over the place emotionally.
Physically, it's really challenging because even a straightforward, uncomplicated vaginal delivery for a first time mom usually involves a first or a second degree perineal tear and significant swelling. And so, for that first 3 to 7 days, it can be very, very sore. It can be painful to sit. You have all of the swelling. You're having to change pads, use different products to kind of soothe the area. You're using ice packs. Just physically, that can be pretty uncomfortable. And then also, everyone, no matter what type of delivery they have, their uterus goes from the size of like a basketball post delivery and then has to slowly involute down. By the time you get to your postpartum visit, it's probably like the size of a Coke can, but it's going from like a basketball size down to that over a pretty short period of time. So like lots of cramping, significant bleeding, like the worst period you've ever had kind of situation. And that's just like normal postpartum bleeding. So I think having that expectation of like, okay, like I'm going to have to take Tylenol, I'm going to have to take Motrin, I'm going to have all my period products ready. Like it's a lot physically, even when everything went well.
Right. I think what's coming through for me is like so many entrepreneurs, they want to start work right away, or they're like, well, my work is so flexible, I can answer emails and stuff on my phone. But it's like hearing this, it's like, no, it's such a physical recovery, such a physically intense period of time. It's like give your body, give your energy to your body.
And then bring breastfeeding in. I mean, breastfeeding is energy wise a huge demand on your body. I feel like when I was breastfeeding, producing breast milk for my kids, like I just like could not eat or drink enough. You just were so hungry, so thirsty. You're producing all of these calories for somebody else, and like you're also trying to recover yourself. So that's hugely energetically demanding.
Yeah. Any advice for moving through that fourth trimester from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think support is huge. As much time as your partner or core support person can also have off with you, as much time as you can take off for yourself, bare minimum being 6 weeks, but hopefully being much more than that for both parties. And then I really recommend like a rolling cast of people coming through to stay with you and be a support. Like when I had my kids, it was like my mom came for a week, and then my mother-in-law came for a week, and then my sister came for a week, and we had, so it wasn't like any one person could take a month off of work. That's not realistic, I think, for most people's lives. But, having somebody come and stay for 5 days and then having someone else coming in, just to be another set of adult hands to move the laundry over, cook a meal, like be the person who can warm up the bottle, whatever it may be, I think makes a huge, huge difference. I think one thing I notice in my patient population, at least, is there's a lot of almost like single family unit individualism that people really, really value, where they're like, oh, we're not going to have the in-laws come until we're settled for several weeks. And I always like hear that and I'm like, ooh, I don't know about that, but I hear that a lot, and I like sort of get it. Like people want to kind of establish themselves, like we can do this, we're a new family. But I think having the expectation, like this is really hard, like you're going to have a lot of time, just you and your little family unit, like, okay to set up some help. And I think preferable for most people.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And, hormone wise, obviously there's that big roller coaster after, but as women move kind of through this fourth trimester section onto, maybe adjusting back to their normal lives, incorporating work again, any recommendations there for supporting that?
Yeah, so hormonally, there's almost like a big drop off right after delivery hormonally, where you are sort of at a much lower estrogen progesterone state, and then the prolactin starts to rise to support breastfeeding. Once you're in that sort of breastfeeding stage, prolactin essentially blocks ovulation signals. So you're almost in sort of like a pseudo menopausal state with your hormones. And so your body is fully in this like produce breast milk, recover, and produce calories for this infant, and not in a place to get ready for a new pregnancy hormonally. That can come with mood disturbance, that can come with some of the sort of menopause type symptoms like hot flashes and night sweats and vaginal dryness. Those are all very common symptoms postpartum and throughout breastfeeding. There's even new research around the genitourinary syndrome of lactation. We're more familiar with the genitourinary syndrome of menopause, but you can get similar tissue changes from prolonged breastfeeding, for example. So being, I think, aware of how different your hormone environment actually is postpartum, especially during breastfeeding, I think can be helpful to put in context how you might be feeling, even after you've gone through that initial physical recovery and you might otherwise feel back to normal. Your hormonal state could be pretty different for quite a while than your baseline.
Yeah. I mean, just thinking about this postpartum era, like it sounds brutal.
Yeah, I like look back and I'm like, I don't know how I did that, to be honest. Like I see my I see my nurse practitioner, she's like pumping on the way to work, like she's been like pumping in the car, she's like putting her milk in before she like comes into clinic. And I'm like, God, I did that for like a year and a half. Can't believe I did that, but I did. You just sort of one day at a time, you know? It's a lot. It is a lot to do motherhood, to do breast milk production, to work, to do all of that. But, you know, it's a season and you take it one step at a time, I think.
Yeah, that's true. And then, of course, towards the end of this too, you technically could get pregnant again. And I know several people who unexpectedly got pregnant quite soon after their first. And so I'm curious what you'd recommend.
This can be tricky, and a lot of people, when they're postpartum, they're feeling the way they're feeling, they're breastfeeding, they really don't want to introduce contraception. I hear this all the time. They're just like, it's just a lot right now. And I'm like, it is a lot right now. But it's also a lot to get pregnant at this stage. And the tricky part, like for someone who might be really good at cycle tracking and natural cycle management and natural family planning, it's so hard to do that when you're postpartum and breastfeeding because your ovulation may not be predictable at all. And I would say most often, if someone is exclusively breastfeeding, they may get a period of what we call lactational amenorrhea, where the prolactin effect is enough to fully suppress ovulation and they actually have no risk of pregnancy because they're not ovulating. The tricky part about that is you're going to ovulate once before you get a first normal period. So you could get pregnant before you ever even got a period back postpartum. I see this a lot where someone had lactational amenorrhea and then their baby starts introducing solid foods at like 5, 6, 7 months. They lose that suppression of the prolactin. They start ovulating, they get pregnant right then. And then they come in and they're like, I started to have pregnancy symptoms, so I took a pregnancy test. I don't know how far along I am because I've actually never had a period. I have no LMP because my LMP is when I delivered my baby.
Wow. Okay. So if people did not want to have a baby right away, do you have recommended forms of birth control that you personally
Yes.
like or advise?
Yeah. And I will also say it is recommended for no one to get pregnant quickly postpartum because from a physical standpoint and recovery standpoint, it actually puts your next pregnancy at risk if you get pregnant, especially within the first 6 months. There's a statistically significantly increased risk of preterm birth, low birth weight, and other pregnancy complications. So you actually really don't want to get pregnant, especially during that first 6 months. An ideal pregnancy spacing is from delivery to conception, 18 months or more, to allow for bonding, recovery, breastfeeding, and healing if you have a C-section, and also even just like uterine involution and remodeling. You want to wait 18 months from a safety and health perspective. But for postpartum contraception, my favorites are, I love a IUD, so either a non-hormonal IUD like the Paragard or a hormonal IUD like Mirena or Kyleena. Those contain progesterone. So those are great options. They sit just inside the uterus, providing contraception at that level. And then your hormones can do whatever they're going to do, whether it's the copper one or the progesterone one. That really just impacts the uterine lining and contraception at that level. And hormonally, your brain and ovaries are doing whatever they're going to do. Other good methods that are compatible with breastfeeding would be like a progesterone only pill. And so I usually recommend one called Slin. This is a drospirenone containing, it's a drospirenone is the progesterone type. And it has a 24-hour missed pill window, more similar to like a combined estrogen progesterone pill. Whereas we used to prescribe something called a mini pill or Micronor, but you have to take it at like literally the same time every day. Otherwise it's not effective. So I don't love that for a postpartum mom whose schedule might be off with sleep and all the things. So I usually try to prescribe Slin if I'm going to do a pill.
Got it. That makes total sense. I am just like in such gratitude and floored with how much you've shared in this whole conversation. And I'm curious, as we kind of wrap up, are there any last thoughts that you think our listeners should know?
So I had 2 children while I was a resident physician, which like I don't know if I would really recommend that to everyone. It was a lot. I have a super, super supportive husband who made all of that possible. But I am an advocate for like don't delay childbearing forever, because I think you can do both. It's hard, but I think if your goal is to have a family, I think prioritizing that along with your career is possible if you have good people in your corner to help you make that happen. And so I am a big advocate for that. But I also think, egg freezing hopefully is becoming more mainstream. It by no means is like a guarantee, right? Fertility is never guaranteed, but it is something that's actionable, especially if you don't have like a super stable either career plan at this moment, and so you don't feel kind of safe getting pregnant right now, or you don't have a partner and you can't make a timeline with someone, for example. So I do think that is a tool that can be used if you know that a family is part of your future.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I think looking back, I wish we started a little bit earlier, just because now it's like, well, I do want multiple kids. And if I'm 34 having our first, like, oh
Right, you're
man,
like, I'm going to be 38 before I know it, like.
if it's 18 months minimum between
Right.
two recommended, the time really starts to
I
stretch
know
out.
that family size. Yeah. Especially like when I have patients who, especially if they have a C-section, right? And like, we're like, okay, like really, we're not kidding. We really want that 18 months, it's like the time marches on. So, and you want that time because when you're breastfeeding, like it's just so challenging for your body. You want to give your body time to like recover. I mean, women can develop like dental problems, osteopenia, like all these complications if their bodies become so depleted from like repeated pregnancies really close together, especially if combined with breastfeeding. Like it's a lot for our bodies to do, and we want to give our bodies some recovery time in between.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
Well, you seem to be doing it right. I mean, you have your own private practice. You seem to be glowing with energy.
Well, my kids are 4 and 6 now, so
You're like, I'm out of the early
I'm
years.
out of the woods. I'm out of the woods, out of the fog. I really feel like it takes 3 to 4 years before you're out of the fog too. Those little kids, like
Yeah, they demand a lot.
they demand a lot. Yeah, I know. I joke now. I'm like, my kids are adults. They're fine. They take care of themselves. Well, they're old enough now. They can like go play alone, right? They're not like, they don't need you for every little thing. It feels very freeing, but
Yeah, that's true. They're more independent.
yeah, a little more independent. But yeah, this was fun.
This is so fun. And I ask all my guests this because the name of the show is Confessions of a Spiritual Entrepreneur. So I'm curious if you have a confession you want to share with folks before we officially close.
Oh gosh. Oh, my confession. This is good for what we talked about. My confession is that I never went back for my string check after my IUD placement. So when you have your IUD placed, one of the risks is that the device could perforate through your uterus, and that happens like 1 in 1,000. And so we always have people come back for a string check to make sure the strings are there and the device is where we think it is. I never went back, and I wanted to be pregnant 2 years later. There were no strings, and I had actually had my IUD in my abdomen for 2 years. So that's my confession, is that I'm a terrible patient. I didn't go back for follow-up, and I had like a major complication because of it. And I'm an OB-GYN, so it's like really embarrassing.
That's so good. That's probably one of our better confessions.
I also bullied my friend into placing it at 5 weeks postpartum, which is like not recommended. She was like, you should probably wait till like 9 weeks because of the risk of uterine perforation. I was like, just put it in there. I have to go back to work next week. Like, it's fine. No, wasn't fine.
That's so funny. Real like bulldog energy.
Crazy, but here we are. It's okay.
I love it. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for coming on the show, for sharing
Yeah,
all
thank
of
you for
your
having me.
knowledge and wisdom. We'll make sure that your links are below in the show notes so people can find you and follow you. I know you share so much helpful information on Instagram and other things.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Kelly. If this episode was helpful for you, please share it with a friend who's thinking about being pregnant, or navigating postpartum. There is so much information here about fertility, pregnancy, and I think having clear, medically grounded perspectives are so important and can make the whole journey a lot less confusing. You can find Dr. Caledonia Buckheit and her work in the show notes below. She shares so many helpful resources on Instagram and otherwise. And again, she's one of the board certified voices that is going to tell you what is up with the latest research, but also her honest perspective. And if you're new to the show, please remember to hit follow so you don't miss future conversations like this. As a pregnant entrepreneur who's about to become a mother for the first time, there is even more that we're going to be talking about when it comes to these topics. With that, I'm your host, Samantha Fackler, and I will catch you next time.